Yeah, she's gonna tell you about her herself.
Thank you for having me today. I am Launa Danielson. I'm from the Weldon Spring Site. If you're not familiar with Weldon Spring Site, I'm going to tell you more than you ever wanted to know about it. So my background, or my bio, I guess, is I actually began working at the Weldon Spring Site back in 1992. Before you do any math, I like to say I started when I was 5. So just leave it at that and leave it alone. I began during the cleanup era, so I worked in community relations back then. And now I'm in education and work with the Weldon Spring Site today. I'm a contractor to the U.S. Department of Energy, and I'll explain all of that as we go. So the Weldon Spring Site, it has a very complex history. It's very colorful, and I'm going to try not to, I don't know how much time I have. At some point you might just have to have me, how much time do I have?
I have 30 to 40 minutes,
okay.
Is that okay?
I will fill that, yes, thank you. I do want to make sure I leave time for questions too, if you've got any questions while I'm here. So the history of the site is very complex and colorful. First of all, playing a very important role in weapons production during World War II and the Cold War, then through environmental remediation, being one of the first sites to engineer and construct an on-site disposal facility for the wastes that those production eras left us. And then to the site today, where it's been revitalized as a resource for the community, for education and recreation. Let's see if this works. Looks like I'm doing it manually. Well, just worked. I'm not changing. We can't do that one slide for 40 minutes. Huh. Apologize. I don't know why I'm not clicking. Or my whole computer wouldn't even work. You gotta love it, don't you? Everything is frozen. Let's see if we can't just click on it. Yeah, off and on. Did it go? I don't know what I did, so we'll hopefully it works the next time. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is what the building, if you drive by on Highway 94, this might look familiar to you. This is our brand new Interpretive Center that opened in 2022. There was an Interpretive Center prior to that that originally opened in 2002. This is the inside here, so we are open 7 days a week for visiting. We have lots of educational programs that we offer every day during the school year, lots of school groups that come, but we have a museum basically that you can come in and learn all about the site. We also have these classrooms that the community can use free of charge. So we have lots of different groups that come in and use these in the evenings, even during the day. We have 4 different classrooms that look like this. So if you ever need a space for free, you can just reserve that through our site. We also have 150 acres of native prairie, and we have that, as you can see, our 41-acre engineered disposal cell on site. We also have trails that connect to the neighboring conservation lands, so we'll kind of get into how we got there from the beginning. And this is our 41-acre disposal cell. We are a U.S. Department of Energy Office of Legacy Management site. The Office of Legacy Management was created in 2003. Their mission being to preserve and sustain these commitments that they have made to protect the environment through these cleanups. All right, so where are we? If you haven't been out to visit us, we are 2 miles south of the Highway 9440 intersection. We're about 1.5 miles as the crow flies from the Missouri River. So the Missouri River playing a very important part in actually why the site is there today. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning, which is some history here. So as America enters World War II, property acquisitions are impacting communities all across the country. And here in St. Charles County, the United States Army, under a wartime state of emergency, came in and took 17,000 acres. Within those 17,000 acres were 3rd and 4th generation family farms, 3 towns. They came in, they needed to build one of the country's largest TNT and DNT factories for World War II. So they came in, as you can see, signs went up all over. They needed thousands of workers to work at this plant. So this is actually the boundaries of that 17,000 acres. You're all familiar with St. Charles County. This is Highway 40 right here. This is the Missouri River. So Highway 94 right here, right in the middle there. All of these are the land plats. At that time, prior to 1940, this right here is the town of Howell. The town of Hamburg was down here, and this was Tunerville. So 3 towns, 600 people. They were given 45 days to leave behind their homes, farms, churches, schools, in most cases their livelihoods as well. This is the town of Howell, originally platted as Mechanicsville in 1865, later named Howell. Just a couple of things to note. So this area right here is now where the Army Reserve training area is, so you can't actually get back into where Howell was. Mushaney General Store, that's something from the town of Howell. That Thomas Howell Cemetery, that's actually on Highway 94, so if you've driven by, you've probably actually seen that. That's still standing there. Hamburg, this is the Riverview Dance Hall that was in Hamburg. This is where most people heard they were actually going to lose their land. This was a community meeting space. There's a famous jazz pianist named Ralph Sutton who actually started here. And so if you come into the Interpretive Center, you can hear some of his music there. This is the Hamburg train depot. This is the early 1900s. So the railroad, which is now the Katy Trail, played a very important part too in the Army coming here. That's about 1915, that picture was taken down by the river where the railroad was. This was the Missouri, Kansas, Texas rail line. That's Highway 94, entering into the town of Hamburg. And this is the Tunerville Y. So Tunerville never developed into a town like Howell or Hamburg. Basically came about in 1920, and it was a Y in the road. You could go south to Hamburg, or you could go west to Howell. And it was just a little gathering area. It's a gas station and a bar, which is always very essential at a Y. This is the Hamburg IGA, where lots of folks gathered. And remembering too that not only are these folks losing their homes and their farms and their livelihoods, they're also sending their sons to war. So this is the Mattis family here. That's Les Mattis right in the middle. He actually worked at the Ordnance Works before he was drafted in 1940. The Mattis family's been very important to us. They provided us with a lot of photos and a lot of history and stories. And in the Interpretive Center, we do have a section and an area. We think this part of this story is very important, and lots of folks come in to ask questions about that time in history. So this is the Weldon Spring Ordnance Works, again, 1940. So our country knew we were going to war, so even before Pearl Harbor was attacked, they were building this factory. It actually opened a few weeks before Pearl Harbor was attacked. Atlas Powder Company operated it under contract to the U.S. Army. This right here, this is the Daniel Boone Bridge. So here's the reasons why it got here. Usually one of our most common questions, why would they put that right here and displace those 600 folks? The center of the country, right? We were in an ideal spot. There was lots of open land. There was the 600 people, but they had lots of open agricultural land. And then they had access to transportation. So the railroad was here, and they could use that. The highways were in place. And the Daniel Boone Bridge played a big part in that. It was opened in 1937. So they needed thousands of workers. They had access to the St. Louis population, so they could make it across the bridge to come out to the plant. This is actually the bridge being guarded. The bridge, just as you come across it into St. Charles County, was the entrance to the Ordnance Works. So you can see it was well guarded here. That was the main entrance to the plant. So kind of a fuzzy map here, but this was the layout of the TNT plant. You can see the same border. The TNT lines were all right in the middle there. And up to the north are the bunkers. If you've been to the Bush Conservation Area, they built 100 bunkers to store that TNT. That's where that area is. And there's an area here down south, which you can't really make out. There's a quarry. So the Army came in and they dug out of quarries. They needed the limestone to build roads and building foundations. Well, and of course, what do you do with a hole in the ground in the 1940s? it became a dump. So they used it for rubble and TNT, contaminated waste. So just an example, kind of an aerial of what that plant looked like. When you think of a factory, it was actually all separate buildings. There were 18 separate TNT lines. So TNT, trinitrotoluene, it was the primary explosives for the large artillery shells and bombs. The DNT was dinitrotoluene, and it was for like a smokeless powder and used for propellants. So that's what they produced there. There were 18 separate lines for TNT, 2 for DNT. They produced about 1 million pounds a day. So it was one of the largest in the entire country. That's the bunkers right there. If you drive through the Bush Conservation Area, if you haven't, you should. Most of those roads will take you right by. There's still 100 bunkers there that exist. So all of these buildings, like I said, there are about 1,000 buildings on this site. They were all very separate, primarily because, for example, this is an example of one of the buildings, because these buildings could explode. So it was an explosives factory. This building is a great example of the architecture and design. It's built on stilts. This is absolutely not a floodplain. It's elevated way above the Missouri River, built on stilts, because if that building would explode, the shock would allow it to just blow up instead of out, and that way it wouldn't blow up the other buildings. So that's the engineering there. Safety, they opened the windows and turned the fans on. That's how they ventilated those. Thank goodness we've come a long way from that. The slides on the side, those are the emergency exits. So that is an example of the dangers of working in an explosives factory during World War II. This was the final product they were making. So this is the TNT. It was the powder that they made, and then it got shipped off by rail. I already explained why here, right? I'm doing my little self out of order, so that's the reason why it was here. That's really one of our most common questions, because as our story goes on, why is any of it there? It really came down to the Missouri River, the railroad, all of those things during World War II. So the end of the war comes, 1945, and of course we now have the atomic bomb. We absolutely don't need TNT anymore. So the Ordnance Works shuts down. The best practice at the time for a factory like this was just to burn it all down. So that's basically what they did. Burnt it all down, and when you burn something and it all goes up in the air, it'll eventually come back down. So there was contamination of TNT and DNT in the soil. So this is what it looked like after World War II. This is that same boundary. You see the river and Highway 40 up on the north. So all of this was surplus property then. They had 17,000 acres. This didn't go back to the people who originally owned it. The Army kept 1,800 acres. This is them right here in the yellow. Most of the rest of the land went to the state of Missouri. That's why we have the Bush Conservation Area all in the north. We have the Weldon Spring Conservation in the south. The University of Missouri initially got all of this land down here. In the 70s, they sold most of it over to the state, and it became the Weldon Spring Conservation Area. So now we're into the atomic age, into a whole brand new era. So while TNT is being produced at Weldon Spring, there is something else going on, right? So there is the Manhattan Project. So the Manhattan Project is happening. This map shows where all of the sites were. So again, while TNT is being produced at Weldon Spring, there's a lot of confusion that Weldon Spring was a Manhattan Project site. They were producing TNT, but downtown St. Louis, Mallinckrodt, was processing all of the uranium that went into the first atomic bombs. So that was happening in downtown St. Louis by Mallinckrodt. And so they processed uranium from 1942 to 1957. And then in 1957, they moved the refining part of the uranium process out to a brand new facility at the Weldon Spring Site. So this is the Weldon Spring Site in 1957. So Mallinckrodt Chemical Works was the contractor. They were a contractor to the Atomic Energy Commission. So the Manhattan Project was operated by the military, by the Army, and then after World War II, all of the atomic materials were transferred over to the Atomic Energy Commission. That Atomic Energy Commission is now the Department of Energy. That's why this is a Department of Energy site. So at this plant, what they did here was they refined the uranium. This was just one small part, really in the nuclear weapons cycle. What happened here was uranium was mined out west at US mines. It was mined and milled there, and then it was brought here in the form of yellow cake. Just looked like yellow powder. When it was brought here, it then went through a series of chemical processes that turned it into metal. That metal was then sent off to other locations to be enriched, so it could become part of a nuclear weapon or nuclear fuel if needed. That factory operated from 1957 to 1966. This is what that looked like here. So if you're driving by the Weldon Spring Site, the Interpretive Center sits right here. This is Highway 94. So this is exactly where that factory sat. So in this process of taking that uranium from yellow cake to metal, this was the final step. So there were several steps along the way. This final piece of machinery was called the bomb, which if you come to our interpretive center, there's a huge sign that says the bomb. We didn't make the bombs there. It's very confusing. I wish they would have asked me first, because I have to explain it every time. We weren't making any bombs. What we were doing was we were making metal. So what happened here, the final step in the uranium refining is called uranium tetrafluoride. They put it in here with magnesium, and there was a heat reaction, and then this loud explosion went off, like a huge boom, a bomb sound, and then the metal settled to the bottom of that piece of machinery right here. And then that metal was removed. That metal looked like this. This is that big piece on the bottom. So this was called a dinget. It weighed 3,300 pounds. Uranium is the heaviest naturally occurring metal. So this dinget right here was what they were producing. It's pure uranium metal. They also produced some other things, like this is a smaller piece called a billet. Sometimes it was shipped off in those shapes. Sometimes they cut it down into slugs where they could send off to become nuclear fuel. But that's how it got shipped off to other places where they could enrich it and they could put it into the nuclear weapons cycle. So this factory operated from 57 to 66, and in 66, the demand for refined uranium really declined. The US, the Soviet Union were actually coming to some agreements, so there were some shifts. They weren't demanding the refined uranium as much, and so they started closing some facilities down, Weldon Spring being one of them. There were some other factories that were doing this in a much larger operation, so they shut Weldon Spring down in 66 and placed it in caretaker status because, as we know, the Cold War went on for a much longer time, so they wanted to make sure they could still use it if they needed it. So it shut down in 1966. The Army actually came in a year later and spent a year trying to convert part of the plant into a factory where they could produce Agent Orange for the Vietnam War. So they came in and started moving some things around, and then that project was canceled, thank goodness, before they actually sent any chemicals. So we didn't have that as part of the cleanup. And then the DOE took it back over, and it sat in caretaker status till 1985. So it sat for a very long time. They didn't clean it up, they put up a fence, they had some incidental oversight, maintenance, but it sat. So really the question I get the most is, how can we just let this sit? I mean, you guys know. I mean, I get a lot of kids that cannot understand how in the world our government or adults would let something like this happen that could sit for 20 years. You guys have been around a while. You understand. That's how things go. You also, 1970 probably doesn't seem so far away like it doesn't to me. 1970 seems like yesterday. So it wasn't until 1970 that our government was actually starting to make laws to protect our earth, our land, our air, our water, all of that. 1970 was when the Environmental Protection Agency was created. Our first Earth Day was 1970. So it really was the 1970s, while that factory is sitting abandoned, that things are really starting to happen in our government, starting to put money towards things like this, our clean air, our clean water. And in 1980, the CERCLA, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, you don't have to remember it, Superfund is probably what you might be familiar with, was enacted. And that was the key. This was where Congress said, we can now put money toward these abandoned hazardous waste sites. It's time to start cleaning them up. So what happened is, early 80s, the U.S. Department of Energy comes in. They actually established a project office there in 1985. And this is what the factory looked like. It's really not much different than how they left it. This is what it looked like in 1985. The project was called the Weldon Spring Site Remedial Action Project. This was a CERCLA or Superfund site that the Department of Energy was responsible for. CERCLA is a very complex multi-phase process where there are lots of requirements. There is oversight by the EPA, the state of Missouri. Public participation is mandatory. So they started this CERCLA process. The very first step, though, in actually getting a site going is the EPA has to agree that you need to clean it up. You have to get put on a priorities list. So that was the beginning. So remember I mentioned that quarry that the Army dug out. This is what it looked like back in this is like in the 50s. So they dug this quarry out. It's 4 miles south of the site currently. They dug it out, used it as a waste pit. It was then transferred to the Atomic Energy Commission, where they also used it as a dump as well. It was used as a dump from 1941 to 1969 when they finally stopped dumping in there. So this quarry is what it looked like in the 1980s when they went down to start doing the characterization of it. As you can see, it's filled with water. So the entire time, this was also a part of the oversight and caretaker status. So this is what got the site on the national priority list. The quarry itself is right here, and it sat still about a half mile from a St. Charles County well field. So this is the Missouri River, this is the Femio Osage Slough, this is a St. Charles County well field that was there in the 80s as well. And there was concern that that contamination would reach that well field. So it got put immediately on the national priorities list. That's what got this whole site and this project started. Thankfully, I'll just tell you the ending before I get to the whole story. The water did not reach the well field, and it never did, it never has. Thankfully, the water traveled in a different direction. It didn't travel towards the well field, it traveled in a different direction. So this is the quarry, so the first thing they had to do as a part of the project was going to get all that stuff out of the quarry. The way they did that was they built a separate dedicated haul road that ran from this quarry up to the Weldon Spring Site. So we couldn't put those trucks on Highway 94. So you can see this is the road right here. It's currently called the Hamburg Trail. If you've been out to the site, they converted it after they were finished. So they took the waste out of the quarry, took it 4 miles up to the Weldon Spring Site for storage, and then they had to treat the water that was in the quarry. That water was drained out of the quarry and treated at this water treatment plant that was built specifically for the water in the quarry. So it had chemical and radiological contaminants, treated it, and then it was released to the Missouri River. So that was done, and all of that, the final restoration of this quarry was to remove the plant, and they backfilled the quarry with clean soil. So as you go by it today, all of it looks like it's the rest of the area that surrounds it. So it's grown over, it's all been filled in, and the quarry water treatment plant is gone. I will tell you, and I'll get to the end of the story, there is still residual contamination there in the groundwater, which we'll do that at the end, kind of what's left. So this was what it looked like on the haul road. They built an actual underpass onto Highway 94 so they could keep those trucks off the road. And they brought all that stuff up to an area called the temporary storage area. So this CERCLA process, it's very complex. You got to do all the characterization first, and then you have to come up with a proposed plan. And you have to give the public some alternatives, and the EPA and the state who are all involved. So they looked at shipping it all off-site, which is really what the community wanted, right? I mean, we all do. Nobody wants it. None of us want any of that in our backyard. So initially, when I started working there, we were having 2,000 people show up at public meetings, primarily with a discussion of what's going to happen to this stuff. And nobody wanted it left behind. But in the research and in the working with the local community and the EPA and the state, we know now that transporting waste like this is very, very dangerous. And that the best decision really for stuff like this is to leave it right where it sits, but to protect it and shield it from the land around it. So the final decision for this site was that engineered disposal cell. But while they were trying to make these decisions, they had to temporarily store the stuff that they were taking apart. This is what the quarry looks like today. As you can see, it's grown over, it's filled in. Then the next step, of course, is the chemical plant. So the entire chemical plant had to come down. They couldn't come in and just knock it down with a wrecking ball. Everything had to be cleaned first. Dust was a very big concern, as you can imagine. So as you'll see, water spray. Everything was watered down, then the water was treated. There were air monitors that surrounded the site and at critical locations around the county, the high school. At any time during the cleanup, there was never any, it was tested for radioactive dust, gamma radiation, and radon, and nothing was ever above background. And a lot of it had to do with the amount of time it took to take these buildings down. It took 18 years to do this cleanup. So, and in seeing these pictures, I'm trying to go fast, but just think 18 years. Giving 18 years, hopefully in just a couple of minutes. So this is, when the raffinate was processed, it's left behind. There's a byproduct that's left behind from it. It's kind of like when you make coffee and you're left with coffee grounds. When you refine uranium, you're left with something called raffinate. It's a French word for byproduct of uranium processing. So they took this raffinate and they dug pits and then they put it in and they covered it with water. So these were really the places at the site that needed the most attention, that would have been the most radioactive areas. All of these barrels and things like that, a lot of that was from the Army coming in to try to convert the plant into an Agent Orange plant. So all that had to be cleaned up. This is a lot of the work that went into cleaning it up, characterizing it, consolidating it, identifying everything that was there, and the final decision being an on-site engineered disposal cell. So that's what a disposal cell is. It's an engineered structure that prevents the migration of contaminants. That's basically what it is. It's a shield. It is a shield that protects what's inside from the land, from the water, from the air, from people. That's exactly what it is. So this is a cross-section of the Weldon Spring disposal cell. I know you don't have to read all those words, they're very tiny. I'll explain it to you. These are the parts of it. So that's a cross-section of it. It is 41 acres. It is a mile around at the base. The middle of that is the waste. It's 1.5 million cubic yards of waste. 80% of what's inside of there is soil. Because they went in to clean it up, they removed the buildings, building foundations, and then the entire 220 acres, all of the soil was characterized and sampled, and any soil that had radioactive contaminants was removed. And it's now inside of there. So after they did that, they went and backfilled with clean soil. But 80% of what's inside of there is just soil. So you have the waste. It is completely surrounded by a series of liners. Those liners are the only man-made materials in there. The rest is all natural materials. The cover is made up of compacted clay soil, which acts as a radon barrier. Then there's some gravel and some sand and some other layers that lead up to the final cover, which is 3.5 feet of limestone rock, which is, if you've gone by, it just looks like a giant rock pile. It's completely covered with those rocks. That cover is there for erosion control. It's so that nothing can take seed in there, like biointrusion. It's for infiltration protection. Any of that stuff can't get in. It's surrounded then by clean soil. So that whole clean filled dike, we call it, is all just natural material that surrounds it. And then it is built at ground level. They didn't dig a hole and dump anything in. It all starts at ground level. And then again, those liners completely surround everything. There is a pipe system that runs out of the waste into a little building. You've been there and you've wondered what it was. There's a little shed that's on the end of the disposal cell. It took 4 years to build the disposal cell. So it started in 1997. It was open until it was closed in 2001. And during that time, it rained a few times. So water got in there. And so there's nothing getting in there now. There's no water infiltrating any of that waste, but there's water trapped in there. So not to compromise that what's inside of there, there is a pipe that drains the water out to a little shed, and there they treat the water, remove the uranium, and then it's released. So this is just some of the building of the cell to give you an idea of the size. These are the liners going down. This is a picture of kind of what that waste looked like. They all knew it was very engineered so that they would avoid any sort of sinking or shifting. And then this pretty picture is, remember I mentioned the raffinate. They needed to stabilize that raffinate before they put it in. So what they did was they mixed it with fly ash, ash from a coal-fired power plant, and cement, and they turned it into a grout. So it stabilized it, and then it went in liquid, and then it solidified. So basically the entire bubble of waste in the middle is solid. And because of that, nothing can shift or move. This is the final construction of it being built. You can see the top layers going on. Again, it's 41 acres, a mile around at that base. The final layer of rock. And this is just kind of an aerial view of it, what it looks like there. The entire open grass area is the Weldon Spring Site. It's about 220 acres. The surrounding trees and things are conservation land in the Army. Just for perspective, if you've not been out to visit us, there's some people walking by it. There are stairs that you can go to the top. So the source of contaminants have been completely removed from the Weldon Spring Site. So when you are at the Weldon Spring Site, visitors are not receiving any more radioactivity or exposure to radiation than you would if you were in your backyard or anything that you would typically encounter in your daily life, because the source has been removed. Again, but you can come out and walk to the top of it. What is left is groundwater contamination. So chemical, radiological from the TNT plant and from the uranium plant, of course, spent almost 20 years sitting. So that stuff got into the soil and it also got into the water. So lots of things were tried while they were in the characterization part of it. Can we pump this water out? Can we pump chemicals in? What can we do with this stuff? And it was found that because of the geology here, the karst geology, and the way the water is trapped and how deep the water is, there's no getting it out and there's no getting anything in with it. So the remedy for groundwater is called monitored natural attenuation. What that means is natural processes are taking over. So biodegradation, natural organisms in the ground, dilution, basically mixing with other clean water or different water, evaporation, as things reach to the site and they reach to the ground level and they evaporate. So the record of decision, which is the final remedy for the site, outlines performance standards and goals and all of those things. M&A, natural attenuation, they're giving it 100 years. They say that's how long it will take for that groundwater to become clean again or to be at a standard that would be normal with everything else. They know where the water is. There's specific plumes that are left behind. Water's monitored either quarterly, some monthly, some annually, to make sure that it stays where they know where it is, and to watch the numbers decrease. It's been 25 years now that the disposal cell's been closed. So we have actually water monitoring data that goes back to 1986. It's all online if you would like to look at numbers. But the numbers are decreasing. They are going down. There's one specific area near those raffinate pits where it's not going up, but it's not going down as quickly as they'd hoped. So even though this site is cleaned up, which a lot of people will say, well, they cleaned up the Weldon Spring Site, it's still a very active site. Because those numbers aren't performing like they're supposed to. We're a surplus site. We have to do annual reviews. We have to do inspections of everything. They're now re-looking at it. They're digging some new wells, seeing if they can do some different things to see if they can get that water to attenuate faster. This is like down at the quarry. There are also, same thing at the quarry is happening. So there's some groundwater. So they also have 5 springs in the area that get tested, surface water. And so the cell itself, they do something very cool called LiDAR every year, where they fly a plane and they put test plots. This is just a square. They actually have squares painted on the cell where they go back and measure the size of the rocks to see how make sure they're not eroding or weathering any faster than they think. They also do LiDAR where they lay targets and they fly over it with radar so they can tell if it shifts or moves, even within an inch, so they would know if it did, and it has not. We're 25 years in. The disposal cell is designed to last for 1,000 years, so far so good. 1,000 years is its design life. The radioactivity inside of it will basically last forever. That's somebody else's problem in 1,000 years. And hopefully they figured out something else better to do with it than just store it. But just real quick, these are just like, this is all of our monitoring wells that are done. This is, like I said, it's still a very active site. People on site that do this is their regular job, water monitoring. Also within, with the water monitoring, there's institutional controls in place. So nobody can access this water, and there's areas where, I mean, definitely within these areas, nobody will ever be able to build or access water. So today, what the Weldon Spring Site looks like, we have the disposal cell. We also have 150 acres of native prairie. So after the disposal cell was finished, the mission originally of the cleanup was to restore this area as much as possible to its original state. Its original state was a prairie. So prior to the towns, this was actually all called Howell's Prairie out there. So that worked out great because, as you know, Missouri has lost most of its prairie land. So now that 150 acres of prairie is actually one of the largest plantings in all of the state of Missouri. And it works out great because prairie plants are great for erosion control. With their deep roots, it works out great to just make sure we don't have erosion issues in the prairie itself or on that rest of that 150 acres. Lots of wildlife are back. We're situated right in between all the conservation lands, so we're in this perfect spot. And also recognizing the responsibility to being in the spot that we are between these conservation lands. We have lots of animals that move between them. So we're very conscious of that prairie being healthy. And we have trails that also run through our site that connect with all of those areas. So that's the prairie itself. So priority one of the Legacy Management Office is to protect human health and the environment. By all means, that's their first goal. Next is really education and engaging the community to make sure that all of these stories of the past don't get lost and all the lessons from the past don't get lost. And that people who are concerned or worried have a place to come and they have people to talk to. So that's a lot of what we do. We have a lot of folks come out for lots of different reasons and come out and visit. And that's another reason why we even have that part about the legacy of the towns. There are lots of people go hiking on those conservation lands a lot. And I love to, and there are still 22 family cemeteries from these families that are left out in the woods. And so lots of folks come in and they want to know the history, or they say, I saw a building foundation, or I saw a cistern, and they want to know more about what happened out there. So it's a great opportunity to be able to talk about that history. So that's it. That's the site today. How'd I do? Did I make it in my time frame? I've been here a little while. I just can't idle light. I don't know, I talk a lot. I try. Yes?
So I don't know how to phrase this without sounding stupid.
There's no stupid, absolutely no stupid
Did
questions.
they know what they were doing when they started the cleanup? Was there a precedent where they had some exposure with cleaning up someplace else?
So this was actually one of the very first sites that the Department of Energy started with, and it was because of that well field at the quarry. So the disposal cell at the Weldon Spring Site was one of the very first disposal cells completed. No, it was all pretty new. I mean, it was all pretty new to them. So that's why a lot of it was, and it's the circular process itself. Thank goodness that's in place, because there's so many steps to it about characterizing. Nothing really could get done until they fully identified everything that was there, and made some proposals about what to do with it. So no, yeah, it was all pretty new, and the reason why those public meetings were like they were is because there just was a lot of learning. There was a big learning curve at the very beginning, for sure. Yes, oh, so many, I love them, yes, please.
My husband worked out there as a guard. I don't know when that was. The two of them worked together. He would get in I suppose a truck and go around and make sure there was nobody in the area. And even in Lover's Lane, there was a Lover's Lane there.
I knew I'd learned something new here today. I did not know about Lover's Lane. During the cleanup or before that?
About the raffinate bits.
Yeah.
I don't know what else he talked about.
Was he a guard during the caretaker
See, I
period?
don't know when it
Okay,
was.
okay.
Yeah, I guess.
80s, 70s?
Yeah, probably
Yeah.
somewhere in there. There are only two of them though. One of them stay there, the other would make his trip around.
That was probably the caretaker status, where they just kind of had people there. They would bring them in like to check on, make sure water wasn't leaking out. I mean, they still had water turned on there. And when they first came in the 80s, there were still electric lines that were powered. So a lot of that stuff, there were, you know, all of the power lines, all the transformers had asbestos, and I mean, that's, you know, they built all that stuff. So they had to do a lot of that just to make it safe for the workers even, to get rid of it first. But that was during the caretaker status. They didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What's that?
I'm gonna have to research Lover's Lane, did you say?
That's what he told me.
Okay, I like that. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, so the United States was not yet in the war
Mhm.
when these people were told, you have no choice, you're out of here.
Mhm.
So was there that anticipation by the government that we're going to get into war?
Yeah, because it was already, like I said, that was before Pearl Harbor was
Yeah.
attacked even.
Right.
So they had actually were operating the ordnance works before Pearl Harbor was attacked. So in 1940, prior to that, they were beginning. There was definitely an anticipation it was coming and being prepared. So yeah, those folks were told, they were given 45 days. And again, this kind of stuff was happening around the country. So it was also happening, the same kind of stories playing out on the Manhattan Project side. You know, so Hanford, Washington and Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and these have very similar stories. People were told, we have to build a factory and you have to get out. And they did.
One
Yeah.
more question.
Yeah.
Is there a good website to go to educate?
Well, so you can go to the Weldon Spring Site. Interpretive Center has a website, and there is a lot of history on there. So there is a lot of the history there. And you can come to the Interpretive Center, there's a lot of history there too. But there's definitely the story and a basic understanding of what happens there. It's a lot, but yes. Yeah.
Steve's dad worked there during that time period.
During,
60, from 58.
worked at the uranium plant?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was one of his group of men. He was the last man standing who died of cancer. He would come home and tell stories to us about how they were given radiation badges, and then came to find out that they were not operable. And that his mother would say he'd come home from work covered in yellow cake, which
Yeah.
exposed the whole family.
Yeah, I believe it. And that is, see, there's workers there. In their pockets, they do have those badges. They mostly look like kind of pins. They were a little different. Absolutely, there's an entire program, EEOICPA. I don't know if you've gotten connected with it. It's through the Department of Energy. It's a compensation program for anybody whose illnesses, right? So absolutely recognizing those workers became ill from what they were doing. So like these workers here, big question is, what are they doing? They're standing around that giant piece of uranium metal. So this uranium metal, because this was a refining process, it wasn't enriched. Thank goodness, again, we had kind of the good radioactivity there, or not as bad as some of the other places. This is the kind of radioactivity where standing around it wasn't going to damage them. Breathing it in or ingesting it in any way, getting it into their body through a cut or anything else, very harmful. It's a reason why they are wearing but they absolutely did not know what they were dealing with. I mean, they were basically handling this material like you would a chemical. You know, like if you were at a factory and they would give everybody respirators and everything like it was a chemical. Had absolutely no idea the long-term effects of this. Again, wartime, Manhattan Project was just do whatever we have to do, and this was pretty soon after that still. Doing whatever we have to do to make sure we have the atomic bomb instead of somebody else. So that whole time period, but yes, absolutely people became ill after that. Yeah, and we still have a few workers that come in. I've got a couple of 90-year-old gentlemen that come in and still visit every once in a while that worked at the factory. Yes?
There's a book, The Rape of Hal,
Yeah.
something.
Rape of Hal and Hamburg.
And Hamburg.
Yeah, it's a hard one to find now, but I think the library has a copy of it. Somebody, one of the families wrote, I think it's the Mushaney family wrote that book. So that whole story of the families losing their homes and farms, the Army initially came in, offered everybody some money, said, here's how much we're gonna give you for your land. And some people took it and left. Some people refused it, fought it. At some point, the Army came back and changed the amounts they were offering. Basically what I've learned over talking to families, we still have, every year we have a TNT reunion, and families come in, first Sunday in June every year, and they love for people to come. You guys, they come in, they bring their photos, they share stories, that's how we got most of our information. There's not too many that come in anymore, but every family kind of has a different story because everybody was dealt with a little bit differently. Like I said, some people accepted, found a new place to live. Some people absolutely refused. The rape of Howell Hamburg is a family, there was a group of families that took it all the way to the Supreme Court. So it's a very interesting story and ended up getting the money they felt. I don't know that anybody would ever say they got the money they deserved. There is absolutely no way. Absolutely did not get what they deserved, right? You can't put a price on most of them were losing their livelihoods, not just their homes and their farms. They completely had to start over. And just the thought of sending your sons to war at the same time is just unfathomable to me that all of that was happening. It is a big part of what I think needs to be a part of our interpretive center. It is still a part of it, is that period of time that happened.
We have 2 copies of the book.
Oh.
In the archives.
That's why we can't find it.
A DVD called The Glimmering.
Yes.
Yeah, so-
Yes, that was it Boone Duden that did that? Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any other activities or events that take place at the site?
So we have public programs. You can get on our website. We don't have a great way to advertise. If you go to Facebook, Office of Legacy Management, like the Weldon Spring Site doesn't have its own, the DOE won't let us do that. Office of Legacy Management. We do a lot of stuff with the prairie, but we do have programs. I'll usually do a program on the disposal cell that really digs into how it was engineered and constructed. So that'll come up every once. It's just some history stuff. We do school programs. So yeah, we have some things that we do throughout the year. And if there's anything, we'll go places like this. We will go talk to anybody. We love it, yeah.
Okay. There used to be a time in my life when I wouldn't ask this question, but what does this cost the United States, and who pays for it? And does the state of Missouri, do the taxpayers still pay for this out of our taxes in the state of Missouri, and then does it go federal?
Well, that might be above my pay grade to answer. I don't know, I'm trying to think about it. So I will start with, this project costs $980 million. So the cleanup, the remediation of the site was $980 million. That was Department of Energy money. They were responsible for it, which is ultimately your taxpayer money, for sure. Is it paid for? Well, yeah, absolutely. There's full-time staff at the site that still maintain this. We have about 20 people on site full-time. We are contractors to the Department of Energy. So it's federal, it's not state. Yeah, it's all through the Department of Energy, all maintained through the Department of Energy. So I guess that would be the answer, right, to that? Yeah, I don't think the state is a regulator, very involved in the site, but there's not monies that come out of state monies for it. Yeah.
Were they well-paying jobs? I know they got exposed to cancer, but.
They were very well-paying jobs for the time. So going back to even the TNT plant, I'll show you that sign a little closer. I kind of skipped through it. So we'll start at the TNT factory, and then I'll tell you about the chemical plant. When these signs went up, I'll have to go back further than I thought. These signs went up. As you can see, they were starting people at $1 per hour in 1940. So the average pay right then, what we have seen, was about 38 cents an hour. So it was very good pay. So they did attract, there were several thousand people that worked at this plant, all came over from St. Louis. The chemical plant itself too, the workers that we have talked to over the years said they all wanted to work there. A lot of folks came over from the original Mallinckrodt plant. because of the pay out at Weldon. And there were lots of people that moved here to do this. So as this plant was opening up, we had one gentleman that came in that said he heard it, lived in another state, pay was great, he moved here for it. So at the times, yes, had they known what they were gonna pay for it, but I mean, yes, it was always, they very much attracted people with the amount that they were paying them.
I don't know if there's anybody else in the room, but I know there aren't any survivors, but I have my mom here today that worked there back in the 50s.
Oh,
You worked at the plant?
I worked for the construction company that built the plant, and then when Mallinckrodt took over, I worked for them for a while.
At the factory? Like in
No,
it?
I was in HR. And
Okay, but in that big administration building that they had there?
yeah.
Okay, so you probably, did that look familiar to you? That's my thing, because I think that picture has the administration building in it, which is probably
One of
where
them.
you worked.
Yeah.
Do you have your name in the book at the site? We have a book of workers so that we make sure everybody
Been
gets,
there.
have you been in to visit?
Yeah.
Well, when you go in,
I'll look.
there is a book that has all of the workers in it. We have our auditorium, we turned into a tribute to the workers. So there was some great old photos, and absolutely, please stop.
I do want to say the lady that said her son or husband wore the little badges. That's true. We all had our badge. And I don't remember that there was any rhyme or reason how often they collected them. But they'd come and get them in the morning and say, oh, we're going to check and see if you had any radiation. And then in the evening, they'd bring them back. And we never did that.
There was
It was
no
kind of like a
connection
joke.
to it.
They're coming here for our badge.
Yeah. So you probably worked in, like this would have been
In the front.
the administration building right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably
Yeah,
where you
first we
worked.
worked where Francis Howell is now.
Yes,
And the Army barracks of Woodland.
Yeah.
Army barracks there. That's where we started out.
And then
until they
moved
got
over
our
here.
bigger building.
Yeah, wow, well, very interesting.
All right, look, can we, oh,
One more?
one more?
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
I don't mean to open a can of worms, but do you happen to know why Weldon Springs got cleaned up and Coldwater Creek did not?
Very common question, so, okay, so I am a contractor with the Department of Energy. All I know about Coldwater Creek and Westlake is really exactly what you know, because it's not Department of Energy project. So to speak on it is really kind of out of my range. I don't want anybody to look to me as an expert on any of that stuff that's going on. That is all being done under the Army Corps of Engineers. What I will say about it is, because I can't help it, is because I grew up in Florissant, so I have very much a connection. I'm a mile from Coldwater Creek, work here now, so I'm all very connected with the state of Louis. It's all connected to Mallinckrodt, right? So all of the Coldwater Creek is related to Mallinckrodt processing the uranium during the Manhattan Project. That's how Coldwater Creek ended up contaminated, and how it ended up in the Westlake landfill. So it is all connected because then they moved out to Weldon Spring. But the cleanup is because, well, the cleanup started at Weldon Spring because of the quarry. Ultimately, they got put on the EPA priorities list immediately. It was the early 80s. I don't know what all of the slow process of Coldwater Creek is exactly. And I only know why this one got on so quickly. And it really was because of that quarry and it probably might have been the time. So early 80s, this was whenever all these cleanups were just getting started. I don't know if Coldwater Creek just started later. I don't know. I don't really have an answer for you. I just don't feel like I can answer for that project. But absolutely, that is a question that everybody wants to know is, of course, is why that's kind of taken so long. And they're getting some momentum. So I do know there's momentum there. But I know there was confusion between EPA and the Corps, and there's just a lot. So, sorry, I probably said even more than I should, but it is just, it's very complicated, and I do feel for people trying to find kind of answers about stuff because I'm not on that side of it, but I'm happy to talk about the Weldon Spring Site, but I do understand the other side of it.
Yeah. So can we thank her, please?
Thank you for having me, very much appreciate it. If you need me to talk, you know I love it. Come again. So